So again, welcome everyone to the YWCA Rock County Summer Lunch and Learn. As many of you are aware, we are taking our 4 Lunch and Learns this year to focus on the 4 areas of our Race to Equity Rock County report, which we were so excited to partner with Kids Forward out of Dane County to create. First up, we will be hearing about the Rock Solid Community Equity Project. So again, if everyone could keep their cameras turned off until we open the Q&A portion, that's going to make recording a clean version for the YouTube, so you can rewatch, or others that weren't able to join us can join in by watching the recording. So ladies, thank you so much. I yield the floor and I'll put your time reminders in the chat.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, everyone, for having us. I'm Kate Lester. I'm the Human Services Director for Rock County, and we're just really grateful for this opportunity to share about exciting work that's happening in Rock County in Child Protective Services, and we thank you for your interest in that. So I am going to ask my colleagues from Alia, Michelle and Tiffany, to briefly introduce themselves, and I will be sharing my screen here shortly.
And I am Michelle Martin. I'm a Senior Director of Learning with Alia, and I spent most of my career doing community engaged systems change work in the Twin Cities. So working on solutions that grow out of communities to create systems that work better for communities. So that's my experience, and I'm excited to be here today and have had the pleasure of being part of this Rock Equity project for the past year.
I am Tiffany Meredith, and I am project director with this project. Been with Alia for about a year, and come from many years in child welfare in Wisconsin in a variety of roles. And I'm really excited about the work that is happening in Rock, and to be a part of doing something different in this system, and look forward to sharing some information with you today.
Okay, am I sharing the right screen, Michelle and Tiffany? Okay, great. All right, so thank you, Tiffany and Michelle, and I'll just provide a little bit of context briefly about Rock County's relationship with Alia. So Alia is an organization, a not-for-profit, based out of the Twin Cities in Minnesota, but working really nationally and internationally to support systems change in child welfare, to help the child welfare system in our country be more responsive to the actual needs of families, and to support the professionals and the leaders who are doing this work. And we started working with Alia back in 2019 and have sort of grown that partnership with them because we are aligned in our desire to improve our contributions to this work. So, okay, let me. Okay, so here's what we're going to cover today. We have a limited amount of time, and we could say a lot more than we will say, and we'll look forward to opportunities in the future to come back in this forum or others to provide more detail and provide updates. So we're going to cover today an overview about child welfare systems change. We hope that you'll come away understanding the how and the why of Rock County's work to create a new way of serving families who interface or are at risk of interfacing with child protective services. We'll do that by providing an overview of our current context in this system. We're going to provide information and data about the racial disparities in child welfare, specifically in Wisconsin and in Rock County. And then we're going to talk about co-design as an innovative practice to help us take steps forward to improve outcomes. The project that we're working on with Alia, you've heard us refer to as the Rock Solid Community Equity Project. We also call it the Equity Project or the Community Equity Project. And this is an exciting opportunity that comes to us because Alia received a grant from a private foundation to do this work specifically in Rock County. So we feel very privileged to have this resource and the partnership here. And so this visual shows you an overview of this project. So it says, in co-creation with the community, Rock County Human Services is building new ways to keep families safely together. So the effort is really around working alongside families as co-creators to build new ways of keeping kids safe and families strong. And our three goals, the three primary goals of this project, are to eliminate the racial disparities in child protective services in Rock County, to reduce the overall number of children who are placed outside of their home, and to engage with families to provide resources that meet identified needs with satisfaction from their perspective. And the context also for this project, you'll see it references in alignment with our Family First vision. Our Family First vision, that references, for those of you who aren't aware, Family First references the name that we use to describe the nationwide systems change that is happening in child welfare right now. So there's an important context nationally to understand about systems change. Family First refers to a law that was passed in 2018 that was that significantly shifted the way federal funding is allocated to support children who are at risk of being removed from their home. And there's a lot to it, but in a nutshell, prior to this law change, large portions of the federal funding that comes to systems like ours could only be used once a child was removed from the home to support them in out-of-home placement. But those same dollars could not be used to prevent that child from being removed and provide support, services, treatment for parents. And so Family First, in response to the recognition that research shows the system hasn't been working well, Family First was a law that shifted that in a big way. Wisconsin, as a state, is also in the thick of a huge systems transformation in child welfare. And so our local systems change process here in Rock is in coordination with and aligned with those other national and state level systems changes that are happening to improve this system. When we're talking about improving the child welfare system to be more responsive, I think it's helpful to just think briefly about the historical context of how we have, as a country and a society, thought about children who are vulnerable, or children in general, children at risk. And so you have this sort of history of the history of slavery, where children are property, Elizabethan poor laws, where you are thinking about children as less than, and that poor children are less than. And then we have a shift to when our system focused on where children who might be in need are placed, for example, orphanages. And you think about the orphanages, the trains, if you've seen those documentaries about placing children in rural, safe communities, transplanting them, essentially putting them in a different place. Then our system shifted later, when you get into the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, into what is more reflective of a current foster care system, where the system is now thinking about sort of saving the child from parents. You can think about it stereotypically as saving the children from the bad families or the bad parents, and addressing the problem of children with needs and families with needs related to poverty, neglect, and abuse by removing the child from their family and placing them with strangers. We know that approach in general has resulted in poor outcomes for kids, for families, and for intergenerational patterns. And that is why the system is driven to change. And so now our focus is really on trying to think about, how do we shift that approach to resourcing families and communities in a way that sets them up for success to keep their children safe. So we think about keeping children safe with their families instead of from their families. And what does a system need to look like that can support that authentically? A traditional child welfare system You can see this is a great graphic from Alia that shows that in many cases, the current child welfare system undermines the family system because it is inherently focused on blame and punishment and shame when families have needs. And it puts more pressure on families in times of challenge and often undermines their well-being and does not set them up for success to be able to serve, to meet their children's needs. And just by design, not because anybody who's doing this work doesn't want to help families, but the system is often set up that way. And so Alia uses the term and concept of an unsystem as a vision for how we can think differently about this work, that we build family well-being and support through community-based services delivered when families need them, through supporting healthy child development, natural community supports, to value and build rather than disconnect family ties, and really to see the family as the solution, not as the problem, and to ask ourselves, what do families actually need to be able to be strong? So we have some good data that shows we're moving in the right direction in some general ways in Rock County, in that we've been able to really reduce, for the last several years, we've been focused on trying to do our work differently and to provide different kinds of supports in this effort to reduce the number of kids placed out of their home. And you can see this data is actually pulled from my most recent budget presentation that shows that this trajectory has been positive from 2017 to current, in that we're placing fewer and fewer kids outside of their home. And so the top line is for our level 2 kind of basic level of foster care, and the bottom line is our treatment level foster care, higher level of need for those kids, both of which we're seeing great reductions in. And we're proud of that. And our CPS staff have done an excellent job of really being open to a different way of practicing, and we've expanded the kinds of supports that are available for families. The reality is that despite this good trajectory, we still see disparities in how that success shows up for families of color. So I'm going to shift here and hand this off to Tiffany to share some information about our racial disparity data in Rock County.
So we could spend a lot of time talking about the data, and we've been spending some time within this project really looking at what does racial disparity look like in Rock County. And we start with this Wisconsin data, which is pulled from a recent study and cited by Dorothy Roberts in her most recent book, Torn Apart. And the data that we're looking at, and in the book it says, in Wisconsin, white children are 71% of the child population, but 46% of the foster care population, while Black children, who are only 9% of the child population, represent 30% of the children in foster care. So we can see here that in Wisconsin, Black children are disproportionately represented in foster care as compared to white children. Next slide for me, Kate. And so if it were proportionate, it would look something more like this, right? That for as many white children that there are in the population, that's what would be represented in foster care, and the same with Black children. But instead, we're seeing Black children overrepresented in foster care. Next slide. Okay. And so in Rock County, when we look at the current child population compared to entry into foster care, we see that Black children, while just 7% of the population, represent 22% of children with entry into care, whereas white children that are 71% of the population represent just 60% of entry into care. And so again, it's just showing that Black children are disproportionately represented compared to how they show up in the community. Next slide. And this slide is, and we have a lot of data around kind of what it specifically looks like in Rock and in the community. And this slide just represents when we look at some of the major cities in Rock County, we can see, and Beloit highlighted there in the red box, the representation of Black families, and single mothers and children in poverty. And so it's just another highlighting of how, where the Black families are in Rock, and therefore how we're kind of honing our project focus on the Beloit community. And so Michelle's going to talk a little bit more about where we're going from here.
Yeah, so we've been at this for about just under a year, doing the groundwork to figure out what is the best way to bring these resources together between Alia and staff and stakeholders in Rock County. And we have a stated goal, as Kate mentioned at the beginning, of eliminating racial disparities and separation. And so really, over the next couple of years, the project goal is to eliminate racial disproportionality, and that we're really trying to do that from the lens of that unsystem that Kate mentioned earlier on, which is to look more holistically at natural mechanisms for support and try to harness that into a project that is focused where the data tells us the racial disparities are greatest, which is in Beloit. And so we will be implementing in the next couple of months something called co-design, and I'll say a little more about that if you want to move us ahead. So co-design is really a new process that's being developed. It started from the concept of human-centered design, which is kind of an existing innovation method, both in the social sector and in the business sector, to create products or services that are designed with the voice of the end user at the center of the creation process, and specifically the voice of the end user most impacted. So one example I like to share is, if you've seen the OXO can opener, that chunkier, it's kind of oriented differently, that was created out of a human-centered design process with users of can openers who have arthritis, and the old thin metal can openers weren't working well. So they made a process to create something new, which in the end turns out to be a better can opener for everybody. So that's the basic concept of human-centered design. And we combine that with this idea of bringing parent voice and parent influence into the process by actually having parents who have been impacted by or potentially impacted by the CPS system right into the design process. So that's the process that we're about to embark on and beginning to work on in Rock County, specifically focused on Beloit, is this co-design process. And if you want to move to the next slide, I'll give a little more insight about what's unique about this process. We're going to be working with IDEO.org, which is an international firm that works bringing design and co-design in the social sector. And really what's unique about co-design is that it's a structured process to bring real influence into the process of creating services and interventions, real influence from the families who are most impacted. There's been a lot of effort to, have advisory boards and hear what families have to say, but there's been it's been difficult and not really emerging that there's a way to actually have parents help direct and design and have kind of a reconciliation process around how new solutions are created. So that's what the co-design process will be doing for us. And it will be a 2-month process. This fall, we're doing the preparation work now that is based on this idea of working towards a big vision, eliminating racial disparities and separation, but keeping our eye, while we keep our eye on the big vision, we're creating first meaningful steps to get to that vision. So we're going to be thinking big together. while we're also identifying ways to get going that are manageable and reasonable and kind of first steps to get to the big goal. And can show you a little bit about it, a little more specifically what we're going to be doing. So again, based on the data that Tiffany shared, and we have additional data as well as conversations we've had over the past 6 months or so, we've really honed in on this idea of connecting Beloit and the CPS system to uncover community-based solutions that could prevent entry and support family strengths. So we are going to have parent designers combined with people who work in the current CPS system to work together with this target community of Beloit and the idea of culturally relevant organizations in Beloit to think of how might we eliminate racial disparities and separation focused on Black families in Beloit and discover community-based solutions that are strength-based with an eye towards reaching that end goal. So we're just getting going, identifying who the parents will be, getting the folks from the system who are going to be part of this innovation process prepared. And we're excited to discover what this process will bring for us.
Okay, thanks, Michelle and Tiffany. And so that was sort of in a nutshell, what is happening in a very kind of large project that's involved and a lot of effort going into our prep for co-design, as Michelle said, and our understanding of the data. And also our awareness that this is co-design effort. All of this is sort of the beginning of a journey that will be continuing and that is really never finished about our responsiveness and a willingness to kind of think about how do we change the system to be more supportive of families. So when we're thinking about what we wanted to be able to provide some what can everybody do around the challenges related to improving outcomes in child welfare. This is a community-wide problem and a community-wide solutions exist. And so thinking about what are we all in a position to do, we're all in a position to think about how can we support families in our own communities who need help. And one of the hallmarks of our child welfare system, when someone, you might have a family who needs help, and sometimes those calls come to the child welfare system, to the access line, which is just by design inherently set up as sort of a surveillance process versus a supportive process. And so to think about what kinds of supports might families need that might otherwise bring them into the attention of our system when the needs might just be support or resource related. We can all focus on strengths to build resilience. And so when we are thinking about what do families need, families need to be able to support themselves and to have an understanding of what their strengths are versus that kind of punitive, blaming kind of approach. We can all examine our own biases about who is worthy of help and who is not. So a lot of the systems change that we're referring to is about shifting away from a system that the only person in a family that is worthy of help or worthy of funding for help is the child, versus the parents, the family, the caregivers, and the extended network who needs to support that child. And so child safety is our primary priority in child welfare, and it will always be our number 1% priority. And we know that the best way in the long run to keep kids safe is to help their parents. And there are some biases and stigmas in our system that we can all think about as we think about how to help families. And I added this plug about support and respect child protective services professionals is a great way to help. Our CPS staff are among the most dedicated and committed social workers and human services professionals I know. This is a hard job. Not a lot of people want to do it. And those who choose to do it for the long term are just superheroes, and they get a bad rap a lot. The system gets a bad rap, and we're working really hard to just strengthen and support our workforce. And so thinking about that, how that shows up for folks too, is a great way to help. So I will pause now. I'll stop sharing my screen and see what questions we can answer.
So thank you so much. This information was so valuable. And you kind of took my role as the timekeeper, so much appreciated. There are not currently any questions in the chat. I have so many questions, but I am not going to monopolize our about 10 minutes that we have for questions. So while the audience is either putting questions in the chat or drop a question mark in the chat, and then I'll know to call on you. I will begin with a couple questions, but as soon as I see one populated, I promise I will stop. We have one right now for Jennifer. Can you please share why you will be focusing on Beloit rather than countywide?
Sure, I can take that one. And Michelle and Tiffany, if you want to add anything, you can. That's a great question. The reason that we're currently focusing on Beloit is because this project does have a specific goal around eliminating racial disparities, and that's where the racial disparities are showing up. And so the idea is that we are starting in Beloit, where we have that the data reflects the disparity in the biggest way. And the whole idea here of what we learned from the co-design process is that what we learn will be helpful to improve the system overall. And so we're not only focusing on Beloit, we're starting here as we're thinking about who are the community members that can tell us the most from their own experience about disparity. We looked at where those disparities show up in the data, and then we'll be expanding what we're learning and doing from there.
So I love the 3 points of eliminating racial disparities in separation, of reducing the number of out-of-home placements, and then also engaging with families. This might be perceived as revolutionary, to provide resources that meet their identified needs. Was it intentional that they are the one designating what the needs are and not the service providers telling families, guardians, et cetera, this is what we believe you need? And then with satisfaction. I think that's huge. And so my question in all that is, if you can share with us, like, what might some of those resources look like? And what I'm initially thinking, you may not have a situation where like a child is being physically harmed, because I'm sure that would put it in a different category, but you notice a family is like overly burdened and stressed, and maybe like a extracurricular activity may be helpful to kind of, relieve and provide an outlet and some maybe time down and some downtime. So the resource might be one to connect and then maybe to provide the supplies. Or am I looking at this in a way that's different from how you're perceiving that? So what would some of those resources, or what could those resources look like?
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, that's a great question. I think what you're describing is exactly kind of what we're trying to get at. First of all, yes, the intention is to very specifically see this or hear this from a lens of what do parents find helpful, not to what does the system think would be helpful for you. And so some examples would be, if we're asking families, for example, if a family had involvement with our system or was reported to CPS or had their children removed, if we asked, what might you have needed from your perspective in order to keep your kids safe or to have prevented that from your perspective, we might hear things like, I didn't have access to substance use treatment when I needed it. I was on a 3-month waiting list. And we can think about what are we in a position, or what is our responsibility as it relates to access to care and treatment. We might hear, which unfortunately, we really do a lot, fundamental basic needs, housing, childcare. I needed, somebody to help me figure out how to access the benefits I'm probably eligible for. You know, kind of the bottom of the pyramid stuff, those concrete needs and supports when people need them. So I think there's a lot of that, and we have done a lot of shifting in the last several years in human services to try to provide more resources and efforts upstream. So when families, now we're much more prepared when families are screened out, they don't hit the threshold of involvement into our system, which is good, but we know they probably have some risk or needs. We have ways of reaching out and engaging those families to say, how can we help without investigating you? How can we link you with services? We also have a contract with Family Services in Beloit to help support and expand their Family Resilience Project, which is that neighborhood level outreach to say, you know, what do you need to families who might have some vulnerabilities? And so those are some examples of what we might hear from families. And the idea of co-design in a really authentic way is to hear that and translate it into action from families with the most experience with the child welfare system, who might have, you know, a lot to, who will have a lot to teach us, I think.
No, and I think framing it that way has the potential to be really powerful. So there is a question in the chat from Steve. What entities in Beloit have you engaged? City officials, schools, faith communities?
Do you want to take that, Michelle?
Yeah, I can jump in here, and I apologize. My internet seems to be problematic. I think I jumped off and jumped back in, but we were really just at that beginning stage. We have through Alia, we've hired a community cultivator who's a parent who lives in Beloit and is very connected to the community, both organizations and people in Beloit. And so we're really beginning with connecting with individuals, and from there we'll begin to kind of build out how we're connecting with the organizations, and with the focus specifically being on racial disparities in the Black community. That will be a specific lens of connecting in with organizations in Beloit. And I know also there's existing relationships that Rock County CPS department has with service providers in Beloit, and those will of course be tapped as well. But again, the goal is really to start with the connecting to parents, so that
You're back. You're muted, Michelle. There you go.
I get kicked out again and back. My internet might not be, I don't know what's going on, but I don't know if you could hear anything I just said.
We got most of it, Michelle. Yeah.
So the next question, and one of the reasons why we hold these forums is so people can make connections and collaborate. So Tammy wrote, is there space for Beloit Health System Counseling Center to support this effort?
Yes. Thank you, Tammy. I think our provider community is a huge resource. And I think that we'll probably learn, I suspect that through the co-design effort, when we're really tuning into the voices of families, we know that unmet mental health and substance use needs are a big part of what often drives involvement with our system, with the child welfare system. And I know I used to work at Beloit Counseling Care, so I'm a big fan, and I know the volume of families that you serve. And so I'm excited to hear your question, because we'll take you up on that.
So Tammy, if you want to private message Kate and Tiffany and Michelle with your email, it sounds like they are going to be interested in reaching out. There we go. Awesome. Let's connect. So please make sure that that happens. And I'm so excited that those connections are being made. I'm going to go on with my list, but I will absolutely stop as soon as I see some activity in the chat. The next one isn't a question, but just something that stood out to me in your presentation, is that the focus is on keeping children safe with their families, not from their families. And I love that it sounds like you're going to be doing work around unconscious bias, and what constitute a quote unquote good family, and who deserves to be with their children, versus who doesn't. So I think that that is an exciting focus. And then my other question, as I glance over at the chat, is actually two parts. So how are participants selected for this kind of 3-year partnership and program? And specifically, can parents or guardians self-nominate and say, you know, I've had interaction with Child Protective Services and I want to be a part of creating this change?
Yep. Tiffany, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So we are actively in the process of recruiting as we speak, and the team of parents that we're putting together is about 10 to 15 parents initially to kind of engage in this process. And so I would say if someone has like a parent who kind of might meet our criteria, and I have a list of criteria that I could share, but reach out to me and I'll get you connected with Lamika, who's our community cultivator that could kind of share the right information. And we know this is just the beginning of the conversation, right? So even though we have this limited team of 10 to 15, the real point of this effort is not to say, okay, check, yep, we did a project for
Tiffany, I think you just froze up. Michelle or Kate, are you able to jump in?
business.
You're back now.
Oh, okay. Well, just know that this is an ongoing effort. And so we're really looking at how do we change the way that we're engaging and working with parents.
Sounds good. So I think the next question will be our last question. And ladies, if you are comfortable with doing so, please do go ahead and put your contact information in the chat so people can reach you directly. So our last question for this section is, are Rock County CPS and juvenile justice available to share these resources and new approaches to help families and keep kids in their homes, even for families who are only in the juvenile justice system?
Sure, I can tackle that. Thanks, Michelle. This project is specifically focused on CPS. However, the resources that I'm describing about sort of earlier intervention and sort of more upstream approaches are available to all of our families. And so those doesn't matter. And as you know, there's a lot of crossover often between our families that have CPS and youth justice involvement. And so whereas this particular project and the co-design is focused on families who have had CPS experience, the effort around supporting families to have what they need to keep their kids in the home, to keep their kids safe, and to strengthen their families is a systems-wide focus, really. And so absolutely that would include youth justice systems, and happy to follow up with you more about that.
Perfect. So before we transition into my conversation with Judge Ashley Morse, ladies, are there any closing thoughts, any final words that you would like to share? Tiffany, we'll start with you.
You know, I'll just share this, that I'm super excited about the excitement around this project, and stay tuned for more and ways to connect and be involved in and work together on supporting Rock's families.
Perfect. Michelle?
Yes, well, first apologize. I think I missed a lot of that Q&A with my internet, but I'm glad to be here as we close out. I think I've connected quite a bit with different initiatives around the country, and in the Twin Cities, pretty deeply involved for the past 2 decades, and really have just felt this lack of movement around more responsive services and efforts that can actually create sustainable change, especially with a disparity lens. And I'm very optimistic and excited to be part of this effort, because I think there's some real connections being made and real starting points emerging around that I think are really hopeful. And we will be capturing and packaging all of our learnings and reflections along the way to share out with anyone who's interested.
Perfect. So Michelle, you provided a perfect segue for me to remind that in the next couple of days, this recording will be available on the YWCA Rock County YouTube channel. So you can watch it for the first time. For anyone who wasn't able to join us, or anyone who is here, you're able to rewatch as well. So Kate, final word before we transition.
Yeah, just thank you, Amy, and to the YWCA for your commitment to racial justice issues in our community and for giving us this opportunity. And I think that what I'll say is, just as a leader of the Human Services Department, I honestly, I don't know that there's anything more important than work that addresses equity and strengthening families in terms of all of the outcomes that our work gets measured by across the board. The impact that this kind of approach can have is huge, and it's kind of why I do this work, and I'm just grateful for everybody's interest in it.
Absolutely. The Racial Justice Department stands ready to share our platform to introduce this program later on next year. If you'd like to come back potentially for Courageous Conversations, which happens in the evening. So we sometimes have a different audience there just because of availability. Please reach out and we can definitely get that scheduled. All right, so thank you, Tiffany. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Kate. We're now going to transition into my pre-recorded discussion with Judge Morse. I will end it before it ends, but again, that full video will be available on our YouTube channel. And then I will stop us for our closing, and I do have a couple exciting announcements. So I will begin to share my screen. Perfect. So Judge Morse, welcome to our Summer Lunch and Learn. I am so excited that you are available to be a part of this. As I mentioned to you earlier, when we were dividing up the report and talking about which lunch and learn, who we discuss what, I'm like, when we get to deep end systems, I have to talk to Judge Morse. So thank you so much. So my first question is, how did you become interested in a career in the law?
Well, first I will say thank you so much for inviting me. I'm happy to participate in this. I remember when your report came out, it was earlier in the year, and there's something that I immediately read through right away, and it was, I think it's just such a good resource and a tool for people to kind of get a better understanding of all the factors that kind of play into these systems. So in terms of like my interest in the law, and how that came up, it was sort of a long process. So I think as a kid, it's something that I was always very curious about, just because I had just through things that happened with my family, had contacts with the criminal justice system. So when I was a child, I grew up in Florida. I have an older sister, Ryan, we're about a year and a half apart. So we grew up, together, very close in age. And for most of our childhood, our father was incarcerated. And so as a kid, I grew up not having him around because of that. And I think you just sort of naturally, question, or I think you really, I thought about it more trying to explain his absence to people, going to school and, you need a parent permission slip sign, things that ask you to fill in that information about mother and father's information. That father part always created a sense of kind of anxiety for me. Even from, I remember being in elementary school and kind of knowing that, oh, my dad's in jail, he, you know, that's bad. People will, if people know that, they'll think, you know, that maybe I'm bad too, you know, and just kind of having that, you know, having that awareness, I guess, of that at a very young age. And then kind of growing up that later, my mom had a different relationship, and she had my brother, I have a younger brother who's 6 years younger than me, and his dad was actually a police officer. And I remember, you know, his dad, John, was somebody who you know, me and my sister loved having him around. We were close with him. But when my mom was pregnant with him, he was shot. So he actually had passed away before my brother was even born. So it was kind of having that, you know, kind of, you have two sides of the spectrum where, you know, I grew up in it with a, you know, a single mom who had, you know, these kids from these relationships, and, you know, neither one, you know, me or my sister or my brother had fathers around because of, you know, in a way, this connection to the criminal justice system. So I was always something very curious about that. And I think as I got older and went to college and really started learning about history, particularly the history of Black people in America, it really became evident to me how much our justice system and the decisions of our courts really have shaped the Black experience in this country, you know, going back to, you know, the Dred Scott decision, and, you know, the question of, you know, are Black people citizens, and do you have the rights and you know, are you included in these constitutional rights? You know, I remember reading about the Loving v. Virginia case, and I have my mother's white, and, you know, my siblings, you know, our fathers are Black, and the, you know, the idea that, wow, you know, even when my mom was born in 1960, you know, that her relationship with our fathers, like, was something that, you know, was taboo, or, you know, in some places, like, you know, people were getting prosecuted for that. And so, and then, you know, thinking of the Brown versus Board of Education decision, and, you know, going to school, I have a best friend, Maggie, you know, who we met in 4th grade, and she's white. And the idea that, you know, had this decision not come out, we might not have ever met, you know, like, we would have been at different schools. And so I think, you know, it was always it was easy for me to see how those decisions played a role in my life, or could have made my life look a lot different. And I don't know that, you know, if you're a person who hasn't been the kind of subject of one of those decisions where, you know, you have a group of people, you know, judges kind of deciding your humanity and rights, you know, it's kind of a weird thing to experience and read about from that perspective. So it just always was evident to me that these systems are important, and they're important in a way that can affect what your day-to-day life looks like. And so it was something I wanted to be involved in and learn more about. And that's kind of what led me to law school after college.
Thank you for being so transparent and so accessible in your explanation. I think that's incredible. Yeah, incredible. So thinking back on your work in the Wisconsin Public Defender's Office, what would you say was the most rewarding part of that work?
I think my time, I was at the Public Defender's Office for 12 years, and that time really helped me, you know, one, find a community of people that I could relate to, you know, that had those shared experiences, shared interests, and also exposed me to communities of people that I wasn't familiar with. And so it was a very, I think just that exposure really had a big part in my just development as a person. You know, I was lucky enough to, you know, I've gotten to travel through my work at the public defender's office. I've, you know, traveled to Washington, DC, and I studied with, you know, lawyers from all over the country through different programs and different training opportunities. I've also gotten to work in different counties throughout the state. So I started off my career in the Hudson office up in northern Wisconsin before I came to Janesville. And you know, just seeing how, I think I've worked in about maybe 7 different counties over the years. So just kind of seeing how different, you know, how court does look different in different counties, and, you know, different treatment options and different, you know, just kind of different ways of doing things. Like, it's easy to see that there's not, you know, kind of a one size fits all approach to the work that we do. And really, I think it also made me a better communicator, because I think that, you know, that's part of my job as an advocate in court, being able to tell my client's story. But on the other hand, you also see that so much conflict between people is usually related to some sort of miscommunication or bad communication, or people that just don't know how to express their feelings in a healthy, productive way. And so I think that was something I really gained a lot of knowledge about in that time, and really kind of has made me a more open-minded, kind of understanding person, where, you know, often in situations, it's not just an either or, it could be neither, it could be both, it could be something different. And so just really, you know, through my interaction with people and kind of learning their stories and learning how they get to certain places, it's really easy to see how two people, depending on their past, even though there's a lot of overlap and in terms of common experiences that we have, but, you know, whether it's a childhood trauma or, you know, just economics, you know, you can see how people can end up in very different places based on, you know, kind of their life experience and how that affects their interactions with people, their beliefs. And I think it really just made me have more compassion.
Thank you for sharing that. And the thing that I picked up on is the exposure that you've had. I think you said you worked in about 7 different counties across the state, and you have to be receptive to that exposure, because there's a lot of people who resist that, and then they miss out on that learning and that empathy and compassion. And like you said, becoming a better communicator and more effective for the clients that you serve. What piece of advice would you give to your colleagues that may be resistant to kind of leaning into that exposure of different cultures or different ways of thinking? What advice would you give to your colleagues that may be resistant to that?
Amy, you're on mute.
Oh, thank you, whoever just unmuted. So I'm going to leave you on a cliffhanger with that. So that was very intentional. The full video will be available soon on our YWCA Rock County YouTube channel, along with this video. I did want to end a little bit before 1 o'clock so I could squeeze in announcements. And if you'll bear with me, I do have another visual that I want to share. So let me share my screen. So this is not a YWCA program, but we are all about amplifying voices of others and good work that's going on in our community. I will be attending. I hope many, if not all of you. This is a free event. It's the Racial Trauma Summit. That Zoom information, I think I can pull it from the graphics. So once I stop sharing, I'll drop that in the chat. They are asking that you register just so their speakers will have an idea of who's attending. So you can see there Judge Ashley Morse, Pastor Kenda Roman will be presenting, Mark Perry, and the other person is Kristen Henning, and she is actually a mentor, which you'll hear if you watch that whole conversation, of Judge Ashley Morris and the author of this book. I know you can't see all of that, so I'll read it to you. Judge Ashley Morse actually gave me the book recommendation in the conversation, so I just got it. I'm hoping that I can finish it before the summit in case I have specific questions, but it's called The Rage of Innocence, How America Criminalizes Black Youth. So again, keeping in our focus of deepened systems for our race to equity report. And this is by Kristen Hennings, a mentor of Judge Ashley Morse and a presenter at the Racial Trauma Summit. So it is August 10th. Again, it's free and open to the public. It is going to be via Zoom from 9 to 4. I'm going to pull that information and drop it in the chat. So hopefully you will be able to participate because I think it's going to be really important. Sorry, there's a gnat. The other quick announcement that I have. So as many of you know, we have Courageous Conversations on the 4th Monday. We are going to be on hiatus in August, but for a really good reason. YWCA Rock County is partnering with YMCA of Northern Rock County. They have this wonderful program, so don't just come to our event, visit as many as you can. Every Monday in the summer at 6:30, the address is there in the chat. It's in the same area, the farmers market in Janesville. They have yoga in the square. It's free, it's outside, it's free and open to the public, but they do accept donations every Monday, and they partner with a different nonprofit, and everything that's collected goes to that nonprofit. So our date is Monday, August 22nd, starting at 6:30, and it's at 221 Dodge Street there in Janesville. So we're gonna have yoga in the square. It's free, but anything you donate will go directly to the Racial Justice Program. So thank you in advance for that. We have about a minute left. If anyone has any questions about any of the announcements, so just the announcements that I just gave, I will take as many as we can fit in. And while we're doing that, I am grabbing the information, the Zoom information for the Racial Trauma Summit, so I can put that in the chat before we close. So I'm going to stop talking in case there are questions. All right, that was my 5-second teacher wait time. So thank you so much for sharing a part of your day with us. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Tiffany. Thank you, Judge Morris. You don't want to miss the end of that conversation. She gave some really powerful information. And at one point, I'm like, oh, that wasn't the answer I was expecting, but it was really great. Please do join us for our August Yoga in the Square. So that's going to be August 22nd. And then before that, on August 10th, if you are available, please do join all of us and community members for the not racial justice, I'm confusing it with our conference, which is in November. We'll talk about that later. The Racial Trauma Summit, and that meeting and passcode that's specific for the Racial Trauma Summit. So you can log on to Zoom. All right. Thank you, everyone. Take care.